Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Everyone hear me? Cool. My name's Jamie Smith. I'm the head of e-commerce for Ascendant Technology. And I'm going to be talking to you over the next sort of 30 to 40 minutes about my experiences in failed projects around e-commerce and some of the things that have caused those failures. None of it will be rocket science to you, and you'll all have probably seen it before, but I find over and over again many of these problems that I've faced are the same sort of things that come back to haunt us. So one of the things I'm going to focus on, and you've all seen the brief, is to focus on 3 specific clients I've worked with over the last 11 years in different industries. And we'll talk about them in detail in a moment. One specifically in manufacturing in the Nordics, another in retail in the UK, and a third in the telco industry in Ireland, and some of the different experiences that they've faced over time. At the end of the presentation, I'll then focus in on a few specific reference cases where I think have been great successes. The successes at people like Harley Davidson and JJ Keller and the Cheesecake Factory. Some of these clients in the UK you won't have heard of, but I'll explain who they are and where they sit, because most of these have come from the US. So, as a brief overview and not as a sales pitch, is to give you an overview of who Ascendant is. We're a speciality systems integrator of IBM technologies. In the case of the commerce space, we focus on the WebSphere commerce technologies and look at the strategies and consultancies pertaining to that. Most importantly, looking at aligning the business and technology so that you can really understand the business benefits of the technology platform you invest in going forward to maximize your return on investment. So, this Nordic manufacturer. I originally engaged with this client around about 7 years ago. I was flown in as a sharpshooter to answer problems around the technology fundamentally. When I arrived on site with them, they asked me to sit at the end of a very long boardroom table as they presented to me every possible facet of why their project failed. But the key factor of it all was to do with the fact that people were trying to sell to them, sell more technology to them on the basis of what they'd already bought. Now, this manufacturer simply wanted to expand their reach into various different industries, look at their dealer network and into their resellers of their goods across the globe, and look at how they could actually ship those through in the right way. The issue here was, with this specific manufacturer, people weren't talking to them. They weren't looking at what the problems were. They weren't understanding why these problems were falling into the right groove and what had happened with it. And in fundamental cases, communication is sort of the #1 failure for all projects. But why specifically the communication breakdown with this client? Well, it's actually, the picture tells the story. It's a mixture of the hear no, see no, and say no evil. In the case of the hear no, the client was talking to their implementer, they were talking to the software vendor they were working with to understand and articulate their key business problems. But nobody wanted to listen. Everyone had their own agenda. The fundamental point was really understanding where to go next and look at where are the key problems. The speak no was the fact that everyone was talking at them, not to them. I sat with this client and looked through why some of the fundamental issues were taking place. Some of them were technological, but fundamentally they'd invested a huge amount of money in a project that had overrun by 6 months and was costing them tens of thousands of pounds month on month to try and get something out there to sell commodity. The biggest issue fell the fact that they couldn't get problems resolved quickly enough. They were totally and utterly tied to IT, but IT wouldn't listen, couldn't understand their problems. So the see no evil is really opening their eyes. So I spent time working with them, trying to open their eyes to the key problems. Now, each of the other cases we're going to talk about in a minute fundamentally have the foundation of a similar problem, but in different veins. And one thing that I always live by when I talk to every client across industry is there is no I, me, them. There's a we, there's an us. And all of the projects, especially this one, fell apart because it was a them or a you. And because of that, they ended up losing in the region of £200,000 to £300,000 in lost deployment time to get through the gate, to get deployed. And then their return on investment took another 6 to 8 months to even get close to looking like anything plausible for them. The good story about this client is whenever we got through this gate to understand why they were having problems with the communication, and we opened the communication gates and talked properly about their problems and listened to their problems as a business, they're still successfully trading today and actually making a substantial amount of money in shipping wood goods all over the globe. The next key thing I've seen in a lot of the e-commerce failures is about expert skill. But not expert skill throughout the life cycle of a project, but expert skill at the right time and the right people. In the case of this specific telco in Ireland, when I arrived on site with them, one of the key things I found out very, very quickly is how much we're all reliant on the contract market. They're paid through the nose for contract level skills in things like architecture and business analysis and project management that suddenly decided to change or end their contract or move to a more lucrative contract for them, taking the knowledge with them. With the specific client in Ireland, their problem was that telco by nature is a very complex industry. And e-commerce in telco even more so, because we're not talking about selling simply a commodity and having an inventory level. We're talking about selling a complete service. That service offering would change on a regular basis as pay-as-you-go or prepay. Trying to understand and articulate the right messages took specific industry experience, and that's why the lack of skills becomes more and more prevalent. In niche areas, industry skills tied to the right consultative and technology skills are fundamental to success. In the case of this specific project, it had ground to a complete halt. The two key technical contractors they had left. They had no governance across the project because their key project manager had moved on to another project internally, and nobody understood the new product lines that were being brought on board. The key point of the interaction that I had with this client was actually sitting down and starting to listen to the business, because their problem wasn't with their implementer and it wasn't with the technology. Their problem actually was internally, although the finger was pointed quite directly at the implementer and the technology. And actually when you got to the hub of it, it was to do with how the business and their technologists were working together and understanding and planning correctly for the right things they needed. In the case of this project, it stalled for over 2.5 months. Simply for the fact is they couldn't holistically look at the total solution being delivered to their end clients. And although other pieces of the project continued to dribble along, the e-commerce piece stalled. More importantly, it made the whole solution far more complex, as what started to get introduced was new moving parts, additional integrations, back-end systems changed, and trying to bring those into the fold and bring the right skills in was almost impossible at the short notice. The key thing with this client was really looking at the plan. And the advice I'd give you, a bit like the communication, making sure those open communications are established up front, is have a plan of the skills you need and when. Building a portfolio of the team. Clients that I've worked with over the years, people like JD Sports, I always highlight as a great example. In the early engagements I had with JD, they were a small internal operation with an e-commerce, a head of e-commerce, a head of project management, and one architect. They've built a practice that runs their e-commerce solution successfully. Why? Because they've looked at bringing key skills in-house to reduce their costs, but more importantly, drive their strategies forward, and work with their implementer and the software vendor to provide a roadmap that makes them successful. In the case of this specific client, building that roadmap of the key skills and understanding how that team would pull together was the most essential thing to success. They've since continued to evolve their solution, grow their practice, and now they're in the point of actually looking at their migration from their e-commerce platform to the next evolution and really take things to a true multi-channel level, leveraging things like social. The last of the key elements I'll focus on is a UK retailer. And I highlight this, customise me, I need it. And I love the statement, I've heard it for years. We want to be unique, we want to be first to market, we want to have a distinctive presence. Now, I've worked with brands like Speedo and Harley Davidson, whose brand presence is all to do with cult or social engagement or being part of that niche group from which you can obviously subliminally sell. The key of retail is hard. You're selling head-to-head against your competition. You're trying to give the best offer. We're all astute consumers. We research, we're looking for the right things. Now the key of customize me is to be unique can come at a cost if done wrong. In the case of this specific retailer, their initial launch, they got the idea of their target market right, and their brand presence was good. They got some really great press, the site looked good, but the issue with it was that because that initial impact to the industry was good, the business lost its track of what it was doing. And the executive team took their hand off the pulse and said to the business team beneath them, you have control, do what you want. The business team loved it. You had business analysts within the clients, you had merchandisers and marketeers with visionary thoughts of what to do next. And suddenly, requirements were born. More and more requirements. I want this gadget, I want this fitting room, I want this dancing moose across the screen. All these extra bells and whistles that supposedly lead to success. When I worked with this client closely and started to do the real hard analysis of where this money came from, the concern was they'd invested millions in a solution that effectively had conversion rates below 1%. The return on investment was through the floor. Why? Because these bells and whistles had been written. Is it just that fault? No. No business control. Where was the cost-benefit analysis behind these? What solution are you using? You know, it doesn't matter whether, in this case, it was an IBM technology as the base of it, or whether it was any other software vendor out there. These companies invested an inordinate amount of money in their evolution and roadmaps of technology. And not being close to that roadmap and understanding where it's going is the biggest downfall you will ever make with your e-commerce site. Why? And in this case, the implementer was implementing function that IBM were releasing months later in free packs that could just be installed. It meant the core application was being extended beyond recognition to the point that this specific client can't migrate. They have to literally say, throw it away and let's start again. Now what does this mean? Well, no return on investment, a project that's cost millions, and what's the next step? Well, another project that's going to probably cost you in the region of $1.5 million to get off the floor and get it right the next time and go back to out of the box. One of my clients that I spoke to when I was out in the States, Academy Sports. Academy focus on outdoor goods in the US, hunting, fishing, these sort of things. And one of the things Academy went through was exactly this same pain of implementing a solution that was heavily customized to beat this, to meet the supposed business benefit the consumer would want. What have they now done? They've now invested in a technology to go forward and stay as close to that technology as possible with focusing on the customization that has cost-benefit analysis to drive the business forward and increase their revenues in the right way. Because without that investment in the technology right up front with the right team and the right vision, and we'll talk a little bit about strategy in a minute, trust me, in 3 years you're going to be back around the same cycle looking at, we have to start again, we can't migrate, migrations are costly, how do we manage it going forward? And customization for me, although I put it as the number 2 on my hit list of all failing projects, it is one of the most costly. Because talking as an implementer, most implementers are very happy to take your money to write customizations. Very few are willing to help you on the roadmap of where the technology is going to maximize your investment in it. And that's key. So some of the other things that fall under this. So they're the top 3 items I always see in failed projects. But there are a number of other items. And something stuck with me during my early training as a consultant, which was being taught how to present and do presentation skills. And the guy taught me, said, you know, this preparing to fail is, failure to prepare is preparing to fail. And it really is. You know your audience. In the case of e-commerce, it's know your consumer market. It doesn't matter whether it's retail or it's B2B. And actually in B2B, it's becoming more and more prevalent, the fact of knowing your target market isn't one market. They could be procurement people, it could be resellers or dealers or manufacturers. Each of them have different needs, different requirements, different products you want to work with. And actually doing it in the right way means you've got to have governance. I would say every single project, and I'm not just saying e-commerce, every project I've ever seen has failed because of poor project management. And usually that poor project management isn't on the implementer's side, ironically enough. It tends to sit on the client's side. If ever there's a skill as a client you want to invest in in your team, it's a good project manager. Not somebody who knows the technology, somebody who knows your business and is strong enough to turn around and say to your team, no, we're doing it and we've got to be structured. And more importantly, saying to the implementer, you're doing it wrong, I want you to do it this way. I want you to work with me and put a plan in place that allows me to make the most out of the investment my business is making. Having that governance, documented governance, is absolutely key. Strategy. We talk a lot about strategy direction, especially at the C level. Talking about business strategy, direction, how is the market changing, how it's evolving. But something that seems to get forgotten a lot, and I talk about technology strategy, which is really wrong, it's more solution strategy. The nature of e-commerce is, it is very complex. Gone are the days when e-commerce was an isolated island on which you traded. And you could literally put a toe in the water, deploy an e-commerce site and just let it run on its own. I view e-commerce now more and more as we go through into a true multi-channel world and these sort of empowered devices we're all using, and say, actually, it's the heartbeat of the business. Because every e-commerce site generally is as important, if not more important, than any high street flagship store. Why? Because of reach, penetration and the markets it gets to. And having a solution strategy is absolutely fundamental to that. And that's not an e-commerce strategy. It's having somebody who can look you in the eye and understand what is the evolution of the business and where is technology going. E-commerce touches on mobile, kiosk, portals, integration, web content, all these different technologies, some of which sit within the tools and the solutions, some sit outside. But without a fundamental solution strategy, it fails. The retailer I just spoke to you about, one of their biggest pains is every time they want to make one change to their front end, from the point of view of standard, structured, unstructured and structured content, they go back to IT. Please, Mr. Developer, can you do this for me on the website? Why? Because this solution strategy didn't talk about dynamic web content and the management of that dynamic web content within a content team. These guys are copy experts and they're content development people. They're not to do with IT. Tied to that is processes. Now, the spin I put on processes is something a client has said to me recently, but something I've seen for years. We tend to try and do with e-commerce solutions is take the solution and shoehorn it into the business's processes and then customize it to meet those needs. Now, in some cases, you've got to try and pull and tweak the technology to fit those processes. But one of the things I challenge you all with, and the business, is what processes can be changed? What processes can be bent to meet the solution's needs? One of the best ones I talk about a lot is reverse logistics. When I worked with Speedo, one of the biggest problems they had, ironically enough, is reverse logistics. Because they're a wholesaler by nature, I'd say over 40% of the goods they sell online come back in a reverse logistics process. But then how do you manage that process? Fine, you can have a process in place of actually collecting the goods, having it delivered to the stores, whatever else. But more fundamentally, how does your e-commerce solution adapt and understand that? Now, customizing an e-commerce solution to manufacture its way into those processes is almost worthless. But allowing it to adapt and work with those processes and change those processes slightly for the channel they're trading with maximizes the return on investment. Change management. And that is tied into the customize me. Have a true control. More importantly, you as clients define the control point. One thing I've seen in the change management piece is too often clients come to me and say, we've asked our implementer what change management tools we should use, what change processes we should use. Yes, the implementer should advise, but try and understand what change management processes, what evolutions of release management fit you as a client. If you get this right, your release cycles shorten. The cost of releases reduces. More importantly, you can look at automated rollout of how you manage releases and changes in the right way. More importantly as well, you can be flexible. If you use a common tool or a common messaging between you and your implementers, you can get a seamless process end-to-end to manage the whole project. Test practices. In my view, test practices are the one thing that people seem to forget. We put them in a plan, we say we're going to test, and at the end of the day, we forget to or the time runs out. Great example, another high street retailer, not the one I was talking about earlier, went live Christmas last year. The key thing of their project was that these test practices were pushed so far out that the amount of testing was done was minimal to nil. Why? How does this impact it? Well, I'll come on to a point in a minute. It impacts the most, which is performance. Without a true test plan and an understanding of how your site is going to perform, there is no way you can ensure that when you hit peaks, that site will stand up. This isn't to do necessarily with technology, it's to do with planning. Understanding what I'm going to get from this site, why it's going to evolve, and how it will change. So the last three things is focusing on the fact of coming back to communication, key skills, and building a solution to give you a bright new future. Now, the key things of all these woes is every client I've ever worked with always get through these problems. But actually identifying these, and I know it's things that you'll have seen before, identifying these things and being disciplined and walking through them together as a team when you're planning will ensure absolute success and maximize your return on investment. So let's talk about a few successes. So from the point of view of Harley, when we first worked with Harley about 3 years ago, Harley were having a problem developing the future look of their site. Harley have one great asset, the fact that they are a cult-based business, brand. So everyone knows who Harley is. You can go to the site, you know it's about bikers, you know it's about how they actually live their lives. More importantly, Harley wanted to take that a step further and say, we know who our target market is, but how do they interact? So putting together a strategic roadmap of why things change and how, understanding the client, allowed Harley to say, first let's get a web presence and provide rich content and information to our end clients. To give them information, share, collaborate, and understand what events are coming. When's the next rally? How can we then work this, and why? Now this all is just general website. It's not to do with commodity. Fundamentally, the key thing that Harley had also already worked out is their first vehicle into e-commerce was not through the automotive. It wasn't through bikes. Why? Because they've got a very, very powerful dealer network globally. And to immediately sell bikes or spare parts online is cannibalizing that dealer network and destroying the trust they've built for years in their brand. So they focused on commodity. You know, on jackets and hats and all these other things to provide their clients with a mobile experience that allowed them to go on and buy the merchandise they'd want to wear on their various rallies and other things. Now the key thing to Harley was really looking at the solution strategy, understanding the roadmap of where they were, where they wanted to go, where the technology was evolving to. More importantly, understanding where the next step is before it starts to happen. Harley had understood right back 3 years ago that their one biggest vehicle they had to get into was social and mobile. But more importantly, social and mobile in the right way, to provide an enrichment to the brand and help them grow. I'm not going to talk to you about JJ Keller in detail. I'm going to let Adrian Harmon, who's the head of e-commerce, talk to you in a minute. But JJ are a business-to-business operation in America, and they provide things, signs like fire signs and government health warnings and these sort of things, and they used e-commerce to really change their market presence.
We help companies comply with government regulations, specifically focusing on Department of Transportation, OSHA, and Department of Labor. Our customers are more educated today than they ever were, and our customers are used to interacting in the business-to-consumer space, and they're expecting that same level of service online in the B2B world that they get in the B2C world. They want the site to know them, to know their history, to be able to interact with them, and to be a personal buying experience for them. We are making that happen when our larger corporate clients log into the site changes for them. Now they've got their own custom promotions, they've got their own branding, they've got their own products, their own pricing. So the site really evolves for those larger corporate clients. What the WebSphere platform is helping us do a lot is a lot of the work that had previously we would need to go to the IT department for, we are able to do ourselves on the business side. We have a very dynamic site that needs very little IT involvement on a day-to-day basis. So that allows my team to be more nimble and react very quickly. Since launching our new website last July, we have found that our conversion rate is up over 13% and our average order size is up 4.7%. These were some of the large drivers that we put forward before embarking on this initiative to prove the ROI for doing this project. So we're very happy with those results. What we're finding that this is very successful for is that the website is our largest generator of new customers for the company. So we're bringing in more than half of the company's new customers. And this new web platform is allowing us to do that even more effectively than before.
So there's one key point out of Adrian's talk there that I want to pick up, which is IT involvement. One of the things that JJ Keller were desperate to actually do was to really pull away from IT involvement as much as possible and put the power in the business user's hands. Why? Because it reduces the cost of the project and actually puts the skill in-house, not in the implementer. One of the great statements that Adrian has said to me in the past is, emotions are for babies. And she says this to our whole e-commerce team. Why? Because when she first joined JJ Keller and was looking at their business strategy and where they were going, everybody wanted their own thing. Everyone was emotional about the success of the brand and success of their penetration into their market sector. More importantly, bringing that back to the facts of how we can make money from it, how we can increase our market penetration, made them successful. The last client I'll talk about is the Cheesecake Factory. Now, they're probably very little known in the UK, but the Cheesecake Factory are a specialty restaurant chain within the US who, surprisingly enough, cheesecakes is their speciality. And if you've been to somewhere like Universal Studios in the States, there's actually a Cheesecake Factory shop within Universal Studios. Now, when we first spoke to the Cheesecake Factory, the problem they had is they had an outdated e-commerce solution that wouldn't grow, wouldn't expand, wouldn't take in their vision. But more importantly, what the Cheesecake Factory had done quite wisely was actually interact with their clients. They'd ask the clients who were coming into their restaurants, going to their bars, and ordering online what they wanted, what they needed from an experience to actually drive forward the brand and actually drive revenues for the company. And that meant they had to effectively listen. Back to this communication. Listening to their clients, documenting it, building it, and then taking that through to the implementer, saying, this is what our clients want. This is what they need. How can the technology bend and twist to meet our needs? And fundamentally, it came down to the fact that the Cheesecake Factory has an experience, and they want you to share in that experience. So a lot of time was spent on innovating and looking at an interactive, flash-based front end to take you through an interactive maitre d' who invites you welcomingly on the website into the Cheesecake Factory, invites you to go and book your table at the restaurant and actually look at the menu, actually download a menu from your local restaurant or find the one that's most local to you, go through to the bar and actually order drinks in advance before you arrive, or actually order hors d'oeuvres at the bar when you're sitting there waiting. And then finally, actually order your cheesecakes from the cheesecake counter to pick up in the actual restaurant, and more importantly, have them delivered to your house if need be. From the point of view of the Cheesecake Factory, when they did this and they actually got the interactive experience right, they saw a 20% increase in footfall to each of their restaurants. Because the key thing is, and I tend to advocate this a lot, that bad press tends to destroy, good press succeeds. One of the things my wife always says to me, that if she has a bad experience out shopping, she'll tell 10 of her friends. And that's 10 possible lost leads. In the case of the Cheesecake Factory, the increased interest for the site alone drove that footfall because people were saying, go to the website, book online, it's really cool. So for me, that's everything I have to say. Is there any burning questions anybody's got? Okay then, I'd like to thank you all for your time and I hope you found that useful.